Honourable member for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his intervention. He, as usual, made some incredibly important points with respect to this trade deal and Canada's role in the world, making fair and just deals with other countries. And I want to pick up on that point now and speak for a few moments, if I may. Mr. Speaker, as has been said, there's no doubt about the fact that Canada is a trading nation, always has been a trading nation. I'm from Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is a trading province, always has been, always will be. The difficulty, though, and I've looked a bit at some of the work that this government has been doing, whether it be the CETA deal, whether it be what they've done on NAFTA, the free trade agreement, and the crux of the problem that this government has is that it doesn't have a clear policy on what its position is on trade, just that it wants some. Its negotiators don't have an industrial policy to work from. The European Union has an industrial policy. All other major trading nations in this world have a domestic industrial policy from which to work from. They know where the strengths and weaknesses are in their economies. They know what it is that they want from a trade deal, not just the fact that they want a trade deal. And that's extremely important to begin with. To understand, number one, where we want to make gains and what the downsides might be in order to get those gains. And if we understand them up front, then we understand during the negotiations that we need to make accommodations for the downsides. If, in fact, we're going to engage in some deal that's going to affect a particular industry, and in the wisdom of the negotiators and of the government, of the departments responsible, they may decide that the gains are greater than the losses. Nonetheless, there are going to be losses, and they have to prepare for those. There has to be built into the deal accommodation or adjustment strategies for possible closing of an industry, the laying off of employees, the retraining, the relocation perhaps of the people that are affected, of the communities that are affected. Mr. Speaker, this is what a trade policy, a fair and responsible trade policy, has got to look like. It's got to be progressive. It's got to be fair. It's got to be socially just. There has to be a commitment to human rights, to the environment, to labor protections, and to making sure that the deal in the final analysis is right for this country. We should be out, I agree, and I bet you there's not too many members on this side that would disagree with the idea that Canada needs to be out there promoting what it is that Canadians do best, that creating new markets, creating new opportunities for our entrepreneurs, for our businesses, for our ideas, for our technology, and for our resources. But I don't think this country, and certainly under this government, is doing a good enough job. About that. What are we dealing with here with Panama? We're dealing with a country that is important because it is a country, and because there are people, there are working people. There's an environment. That's a government that is perhaps making some mistakes and doing some things that we're not happy about, but nonetheless, there are hard-working women and men in that country that are trying to provide for themselves and for their families and for their communities. Important ecosystem in Panama that, that we need to ensure is maintained, Mr. Speaker. But in 2008, for example, two-way merchandise trade between the two countries reached only $149 million, less than 1% of Canada's total trade. Now, I'm not suggesting because we only do a bit of trade with this country, it's not important. I would say just the opposite. It's even more important that we tailor the kind of deal that we do with a country like this, a developing country, that we tailor the deal so that we're all gaining from the experience, that the people of Panama are going to gain as much as the people of Canada, and that businesses in Panama are going to gain as our businesses in this country. But the problem is this government has put together a deal that is very much like the NAFTA deal. It's like a deal that they would do with a major industrialized country. It doesn't have the kind of sensitivities that are necessary in dealing with a developing country, Mr. Speaker, and those are some of my concerns. It doesn't deal satisfactorily to my liking with human rights issues. It doesn't deal appropriately with the environment, with labor rights. And as has been stated by successive members of this caucus, it doesn't deal with the fact that Panama is a tax haven. That Panama has been delisted by the OECD. It's been colored as the member before me spoke. It's been given a black and a gray and all different, because it won't provide information. There's no transparency with respect to financial transactions. And even with this deal, the government of Canada tried to get the government of Panama to come forward to sign an taxation information agreement that would make their information more transparent. It didn't happen. But it's a deal, right? It's a free trade deal, and this government's a free trade government, and they're going to sign it come what may. And you know, it was interesting, listening to my colleagues, and we talk about pushing for environmental protections and pushing for human rights and for labor rights, and I began to think about what we've been talking about in this House in the past number of weeks, in the past number of months. The fact that this government is, how many times have they brought in back-to-work legislation?
21.
21 times this government has brought in back-to-work legislation, completely and utterly taking away the right to free collective bargaining for working people in this country. They are getting rid of science. They've shut down the Freshwater Institute, the Center for Offshore Oil, Gas and Energy Research, gone. National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy, gone. National Council on Welfare, gone. Fisheries Research Conservation Council disbanded last fall. Organizations that provide valuable scientific and fact-based research to help governments and to help the private sector, to help communities make sound decisions, conduct themselves in ways that makes our communities and makes our country stronger. This government has brought in a piece of legislation we're dealing with right now, the Trojan horse bill, Bill C-38. They have stuffed so much legislation into that bill, it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented. 70 pieces of legislation are changed. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, completely repealed. Completely repealed. The Fisheries Act is changed substantially to the point where it's hardly recognizable. EI is being irreparably changed. And is it being changed in the face of discussion, of debate? Not one iota, Mr. Speaker. This government, unfortunately, is engaged in relations with countries like Panama, and it has absolutely nothing to hold to that country, because the way it's conducting itself is anti-democratic and opposed to human rights. and that's why they should be subject to all kinds of criticism from this side and from others in this country. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank my colleague for having really provided a good framework for this free trade agreement debate. He provided nuance, but he outlined the priorities for us, which are, among other things, the environment and human rights. What we have here is a bad cut and paste of the George Bush type free trade agreements that put the corporations first and the people second. I would like to hear him tell us about why the Canadian public should be a little bit concerned about the lack of environmental protections and protections for human rights and labor.
Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Well, look, I thank my colleague very much, my seatmate very much for his question. It's a very important question because it gets to who we are as Canadians. It gets to our values and the fact that whatever we do, whatever the government of this country does, whether it's here in Ottawa or whether it's in Halifax or in Dartmouth Cole Harbour or whether it's in Panama, wherever it is, it's reflecting the values of the people of this country. And in a case like this where they're negotiating a trade deal with a developing country, people are looking at us, at our country, and they're saying, they're taking advantage of that country. They're a much bigger country. They've got a much bigger trade balance than does Panama. Panama is struggling. This country's taken advantage of. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about labor protections. And they're saying, and Canadians, I think, are increasingly saying, what happened to the principles of justice, of good governance, of governance, and walking this earth with integrity?
Questions et commentaires? Questions and comments? La députée de Beauport.
Honourable member for Beauport, Limoilou. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for Dartmouth Cole Harbour for his very eloquent remarks that got to the heart of the subject. I want to talk about another concern that is very strong in my riding. There is a plant that was closed. We are hoping that it will be reopened in the next few days, but the employees don't really know how that's going to work or much about the corporation that will be opening it and the new owners. We know that there is a threshold for foreign investment, for foreign ownership, that is $1 billion. And I find that the Conservative government is not very consistent in its approach. It wants to take care of the economy, but in fact, it also at the same time wants to create problems through these free trade agreements in other countries. Could my colleague tell me if he is as troubled by this as I am and elaborate somewhat?
The member for his question, and I know that he's working extremely hard for his constituents that find themselves in that difficult situation of not having a job and waiting with bated breath as to who's going to take over ownership of that country. He talked about foreign ownership, and the government has actually recently reduced that threshold of $1 billion. They've reduced it considerably, and they've reduced it considerably, I believe, because everything in this country is for sale as far as this government is concerned. That they're looking around the world and saying, if you have enough money, China is taking a bigger and bigger stake in the oil sands in Alberta. Other countries we saw where with Caterpillar, American company came up and took over Caterpillar, and within 5 years they shut it down. They took all the money, the tax breaks, and everything else. They enjoyed all of the benefits of being in Canada. They shut her down. They put those workers out of work, and then they went back to the United States. That's what happens when you don't have a government that's prepared to stand up for working people, that they can be taken advantage of by foreign companies, and every Canadian has reason to be concerned for that.